For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Jillian Perkins-Marsh, and I work as the Alumni Career Counselor within Alumni Career Services, which is a partnership between the Student Success Center and the Alumni Association. So I work with folks for up to 10 years of graduation from a degree granting program. So I'm happy that you can join us today. We will be talking about the super exciting topic of cover letters. And I say that honestly, cover letter writing was actually one of the things that drew me to employment counseling right after as a new graduate. To be right honest, my undergrad was in English and communications, and I wasn't sure what to do, but when I found out that there was a job where I could actually kind of help people write in a way that would help them reach their goals, namely their job goals, and help them critically think about the kinds of skills that they have to offer for work, I was sort of sold. So I've been doing this ever since, and absolutely love it. So if you need any assistance, please know that you are welcome to book a one-on-one meeting with me as well. Okay, so that being said, we are going to get started with a poll just to help me understand sort of where folks are. So you should be viewing these questions. If you just attended the resume session, you've already seen these questions, so my apologies, but can't assume that it's the same group here as well. We do lots of webinars regularly, so it is nice to see some names recurring. I do recognize a lot of names on my screen here, which is awesome. Okay, so we've got half of folks on the webinar actively job searching. Okay, that's awesome. With just slightly less sort of job searching. And interesting, yeah, similar to our last session, we've got about half folks graduate less than a year ago. Okay, interesting composition. So it's similar to our last session. So I recognize that there's a lot of expertise likely that you have, that everyone has in different areas. So if you're part of our last session, you'll know that people shared tips and tricks. So I welcome you to do that here as well to help your colleagues with their job search. Worth your while. Okay, so curious now, this isn't a formal chat, it's more about kind of conversations. I know cover letters aren't necessarily as sort of cut and dry as resumes usually, because we want to make them very personalized. So I am curious, for those of you who are on this webinar today, what is it that sort of drew you to this webinar? It could be, what about cover letters do you find challenging? What do you wish to learn about today? And it'd be helpful for me. I will try to do my best and customize this session to your needs. So feel free to put any thoughts that you might have in chat, and I will address those concerns as we go along. Okay, so while we're waiting for the chat to fill up, I'm also curious about, for folks who, how many folks write a cover letter with every resume? Here we're getting lots of activity on the chat. So one sec here. Okay, so we're getting lots of people saying that they write the cover letter for each position. Let's see, the majority of folks so far. Okay, so these are really, really, really good thoughts here. I'm just going to read them out loud, and we're going to try to address these. So how do you make your cover letter sound not like everyone else's? Yeah, how do I present who I really am, and do I make it appealing? How do I make it appealing to the hiring manager? Super good question. Length of the cover letter, what to exclude and exclude, how to customize cover letters, what to exclude, how to tailor each cover letter for each position, only if they ask for one. Okay, whether to add a cover letter, even if the employer asks only for a resume. Okay, so these are excellent thoughts. So thank you so much for your comments here. So resumes at its core is basically an opportunity for the job seeker to speak more in depth about what they want the employer to notice about them. Okay, so in essence, if you think of your resume as sort of like a buffet, it has everything of what you did, like relatively speaking. Your cover letter is going to be sort of like the 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 things that are most important, that you like the most, that relates to what you want to do. So it's basically your opportunity to differentiate yourself from other candidates, because it's you don't get a ton of space on a cover letter or on a resume to do that. So your cover letter is like your personalization. So with recruiters, there's lots of research around this. It depends on the individual whether or not an individual will look at the cover letter first or the resume first. With most research studies, majority of recruiters will say that they look at the resume first, which to me, I personally do as well. I feel like the resume is a quick way to sort of do like the checklist. Like, do they have the degree I'm looking for? Do they have the main skills? Is it sort of relatively like customized to what I'm looking at? Am I more interested? And if I am interested in that individual, then I go to the cover letter to learn more about them. I particularly will read a cover letter when I have to decide between a handful of candidates. Let's say I can only interview like 3 people, but I have 5 potentials. That's where I find the cover letter for me makes a really big difference in terms of who I end up bringing in. So that being said, in situations where an employer does not request a cover letter, you by no means need to submit one. So you can sort of follow those instructions. That being said, there's also, it's unlikely going to be harmful either. So if you want to have an opportunity to say a little bit more, then feel free to incorporate a cover letter. Or if you're, say, emailing your application, you can also put some of that personalized element within your email message, like why those things might be, like why you want to apply to the organization, what it means to you, and so on. Really, it's a way to differentiate yourself from other candidates, I think is really important. Okay. All right. So from Dane, so how to make a cover letter that makes you look, okay. Sorry, I've got a job on the cover letters in hindsight, closing based on the research I didn't know. Okay, well, congratulations on getting that job. I think that's awesome. The end result went well for you. So we'll go through sort of some best practices in terms of how to structure the cover letter and what to include, and just some general suggestions. Okay, so let's start with communication skills. So one of the things that a cover letter can do very quickly is to communicate the skills that you have in terms of writing. So now if you're saying to yourself, oh dear, I need some assistance with my writing, I've put in the chat a link to a really great website called hemingwayapp.com. I tend to use it after it was recommended to me by our marketing team for their writing. So I figured, okay, it must be good. And it is. I love it a lot. You basically can copy and paste content into it, and it will color code like where you have like too many adjectives, let's say, or perhaps you have like a lot of passive voice. We want to avoid passive voice when we're communicating in a cover letter. We want to sort of focus on the active voice, because it's just, as the name suggests, it's more active and it's more engaging, and it engages people to want to read about us. So we want to use a tool as at least a first like kind of scan to edit your resume for issues, grammar issues or whatnot, or clarity issues, and then get some other folks to read it as well. So enjoy. That's my favorite app. It's kind of like Grammarly, but I find it's a little bit easier to use, and it's free. All right. So in terms of what sort of makes a great cover letter, I think I've alluded to it a little bit already, but formally, the things that are going to make your cover letter like not just good, but great is going to be that it is customized to the job. It's going to be customized to include action and results. So similar to, actually, that's our next slide, so I'll just leave that for a second. But basically, when we look at how to identify like or speak to the employer's needs, we're basically going to be telling select stories about past examples that have proven that we have those skills and qualifications they are looking for. And as a bonus, hopefully we can demonstrate a little bit of knowledge about the actual employer as well. And then around the sort of customized action results is going to show your abilities. So try to avoid repeating examples from your resume. We want to avoid sort of having that listing approach. Rather, we want to engage them. Think of it as telling a story and using your stories or telling your stories using the STAR method. So the STAR method, for those of you who may not have heard of that before, it's a very helpful acronym to explain the narrative structure of how to tell a story. In other words, how to give an example to prove that you have a particular skill. So first you outline the situations, you provide context of what you are doing, the problem you faced. The action is all about the skills and knowledge you used. You include what the outcome was, so what happened, ideally what that positive kind of outcome was, or what you learned from that experience. And then, if possible, ideally we want to circle back to the position at hand and refer back to the position. Okay. Yeah, that is fair to say, Ivan. Yep. Yeah. STAR is good for when it's a narrative communication in like full sentences, because then you have space to articulate the problem that you faced. So when we think about STAR, I didn't include a slide of this, but if you can imagine just like a triangle with S like STAR written down, so like STAR, and you think about how that kind of fills up the triangle, there's not as much on the top part where you're articulating sort of the context of the structure or the situation, the task, but you're more focusing on the action result, because that's where you're articulating like what you did, what skills you used, the knowledge that you might have used, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to also give you this particular reference. I just put it in the chat. It's one of my favorites. It's a resume and cover letter toolkit. It offers some before and after versions of resumes and cover letters in all different areas. And the majority of them actually have a job posting as well. So it's really nice. They give you a job posting. They show something like this. They call it a T-chart, but it's basically same thing as a qualification chart. And then it outlines how that is targeted into a cover letter in terms of like a before and after version. So you can kind of get a sense of like what good cover letter writing looks like when you look at those after versions. So I'd encourage you to take a look at some of those. That would be ideally ideal. And Dennis, yeah, so you read my mind actually. Yeah, so in that example in the toolkit, you'll see a variety of cover letters that use STAR. Okay, so for those of you who are just in the resume workshop, apologies, this is the same next couple of slides. But those of you who are new, this really aligns to how to customize every letter. And yes, every letter, I would argue, is really, really important. So ideally, we want to deconstruct the job posting. Ideally, highlight sort of the main elements that they're looking for. Using color is lovely. So you have sort of visual compare and contrast format. And then you're going to identify you would prioritize, like, what are the most important things they're looking for? And then subsequently, what is your best example to prove that you have those as illustrated in a star example, as we just talked about. So this is going to be a bit of a process to sort of kind of create a qualification chart. But once you do, this particular technique is extremely helpful for not just cover letters, but also interview strategies. This is the first go-to for any interview coaching that I do, because you'll get a lot of really great examples to use. Julie, super good question. So she asked, how can we learn the industry language? So for those of you who are on the session, I welcome you to share some of your thoughts on that question as well. I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is reviewing the job postings, but it also could involve, like, potentially connecting with several professionals within the field in which you want to work. Have some informational interviews so that you can kind of hear how they describe their job, the kind of language that they use, and so on. The other thing could be also connecting on professional groups on LinkedIn is a super great way to do that as well, so that you kind of stay in the know in terms of what's happening in your field, and yeah, staying up to date in terms of people's comments as well as articles and so on. Okay. So that gets us to kind of the structure. So in the opening paragraph, I think it's important to kind of think of how can you start your cover letter in a way that immediately sort of projects yourself as different from others and also engages your audience. So you might ask yourself some questions like, how does your background fit this position? Why should they hire you? What is it about you that will benefit the employer? AKA, like, what skills and main experience might you offer? And then also, why do you want to work for that employer? So those are a few different questions that you can kind of ponder about, and identify, and then decide what you want to do with that information. There's no right or wrong, but when you can start your introductory paragraph with something a little bit more, I would say, like, thought out, than say, like, I am interested in applying for X position at Y company, your letter is immediately going to stand out. Okay. So with the opening paragraph, there's a few things, like just general conventions that people would expect, that it would incorporate the name of the position, where you found that position posted, and if anyone referred you to the position. If you can include just one of these things that sort of aligns, that would be ideal. Okay. The second section, or the middle section, so the middle section might be like maybe one or two paragraphs, is going to support, basically your argument that you're a good candidate for that job. So you're going to organize the content based on what is most relevant and most important to include first. Okay. Now, the way you organize your information is totally up to you. There's a couple different ways to do this. You could maybe create, like, start what would be like your first part of your middle section as like your most relevant experience to kind of keep them reading. It might incorporate your core skills, or perhaps it might be a knowledge paragraph, depending on your judgment. And I'm going to show you a few extra sections as well as how to, like, in terms of how to categorize information within your letter in a moment as well. It's just a few slides below. Okay. So in terms of the middle section, so keeping in mind that it is meant to sort of articulate that you have the skills that they're looking for. So we want to make sure you're using those star examples, that you're circling back to why they're relevant, so relating to the employer's needs, and try to avoid assuming that they will read between the lines. So think about what you really want to say, and ensure that you're saying that explicitly. I would say too often folks write in the passive voice, which isn't as strong of a voice to write in. So the passive voice, I don't know if anyone is not familiar with that, that would allude to when you have like two words that are past tense together. So let's say like, I had developed, or even something like I had the opportunity. This is a bad example. Maybe let's go with had developed. Okay. That's not as strong as sort of saying just right away of like what you have to offer. So if you go right into that statement of like what your skill is that you want to highlight, that's ideal. Okay. So here's an example of kind of what that might look like in a paragraph format. So you have the star format, and I've just put in some examples of what that could look like. This would be an example of someone who's in their final year of McMaster. The situation is giving enough context for someone reading it who doesn't know them at all to understand what they're talking about. And what the context was. The task is the sort of the challenge that was faced, right? So in this case, it was a very tight deadline. So that could be quite relevant to whoever's reading this. The action is going to be about what you did. So what were the steps that you took in order, like in that leadership role, let's say. So this person chaired the brainstorming sessions, delegated tasks, and tracked timelines, ensured that all team members had the resources and support to complete their portion of the report, and organized all submissions into a comprehensive and cohesive analysis of so and so. So that's a really nice like statement that kind of gives me a good idea of what that individual does, and then rounding that up with the result is ideal. And then you'll notice that there's also an addition to adding a relevance. So it circles back to the employer, that tells them that you're excited to be contributing, say, that experience to this particular job that you're applying for. And then after that section, the middle section, we've got the closing paragraph. So that is really going to ideally restate like your interest in a summary format, trying to make sure that the closing is strong by ultimately sort of like summarizing like the key things that you want to highlight is ideal. It might also sort of reiterate your interest in the organization. Perhaps it's the last opportunity to sort of let them know why you're interested, and as well, certainly thank them for their consideration. And then you can include a call to action. So that an example of that could be perhaps if you were going to follow up on your application in a period of time, what could be another call to action? It could be, it's not so action oriented, but it could be even like looking forward to discussing, how I might contribute to, the XYZ team at your organization, and look forward to hearing from you. So it depends on a few things, like has the cover letter or has the job posting kind of said, no follow-up or whatnot. If that is the case, then, you're a little bit limited. But that being said, it sometimes comes down to people's personality in terms of how persistent one wants to be. And certainly for jobs that you're really keen on, I do encourage like a follow-up if you can, to get a sense on where they are in the selection process and perhaps an opportunity to introduce yourself. So ideally, in the ideal world, the application to a particular position is going to be as a follow-up to, say, meeting somebody in person. And if you've done that, that's like awesome. It doesn't, of course, doesn't always work out that way. But certainly if there's some target organizations that you're really, really keen on working for, I might recommend even before there's a job posting to absolutely go ahead and try to set up some informational interviews with folks who are doing the same kind of work that you are, so that you can learn a little bit more about the job itself, about the company. And that's going to help you, like determine that this is a great fit for you, but B, also when a position does come up, it's going to sort of position you in a way that says like, hey, I was really interested in this company before there was even a position. Hopefully, you can manage that relationship, and it definitely demonstrates a lot of interest. So that's a big way how you can differentiate yourself. Okay, so feel free to pop some questions in the chat as well. Now that gets us to the structure, like options for structure. So this is kind of my favorite part. So there is not one way to structure a cover letter. Probably most of us, or most of everyone, has sort of seen like paragraph format, which is probably the most common. It's absolutely effective. That would be kind of the T-cell cover letter. So you might remember this looks a lot like the qualification chart, because it does. So let's say the employer needs, like need number one there. In your first paragraph, you're going to talk about the need, like their first need. Okay, so whether or not that's like a particular skill, like let's say their main needs are analytical skills and client service, then your paragraphs would be analytical skills and client service. So it would offer supporting examples to those key competencies and then circle back, okay, and relate back to the job. The other option, and this is called the bolded point style. So this would be ideal for, I would say, like an individual that can kind of characterize the main skills that the employer is looking for in a fairly tangible way. So in essence, someone asked about the industry language. Yes, that was Julie. So this would be a good example of that. So let's use that example that I just gave. It could be the same thing. So the first core competency might say something like data analyst and client relationships or client communication. Those are examples of like a core competency. Let's say hypothetically, like sort of the two main ones that would be desired by the employer. So the only difference really with this is that it kind of gives like almost like a subheading, so that it helps with a quick scanning of the document, so that at a quick view, someone kind of knows exactly what that paragraph is going to be about. I'd say this can work fairly well. I've seen 2 to 3 competencies generally work. Any more than that, it becomes too long. But anyway, something to consider. Okay, so I guess a couple of the takeaways, I guess, of the cover letter webinar today is, one, really focus on what you can do for them, not what you necessarily want from the employer. It's really important to sort of prove that you have the skills that they're looking for. Make sure that when you're creating your points, try to incorporate your themes together. That's just really great writing skill, or writing technique, I guess I should say. What else might be really helpful that we haven't really spoken to? Things to avoid. Let's see. Yeah, I think mm, I would say like the most common thing that I probably see when I look at cover letters is cover letters that just haven't necessarily been customized enough. So although I recognize it is a time investment in doing so, uh, by kind of implementing some of these techniques, it might help with like a quicker turnaround, but still in a really effective cover letter strategy. Like for example, like if you use the bullet points or the bolded points, sometimes a couple of my clients are use those and sort of swap them in and out, and then just add on the information that relates specific to that company. So it can be like kind of a nice time saver. Good question, Julie. So if you can at all, absolutely address the letter to someone who is the hiring manager. So, I mean, some job applications will say who to address the letter to. In that case, absolutely, you have that information. That's really great situation. Um, Unfortunately, many cover letter or many job postings don't actually give you that exact information. So if it doesn't, what you could do is try to look for clues. If it says like, something like reporting to um, the general manager of XYZ department, try to find out who that individual is. And that's going to be the person that you would address the cover letter to. So LinkedIn can be a decent tool for that. Or perhaps if you do have a contact within the organization, you could always send a letter or an email and let them know that you're interested in applying for the position, and ask them if they would know who the proper contact person is to address your letter. Okay, here's another question here. So what do we think about using headings above each paragraph that define what the paragraph is about? For example, about me and my experience. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think, I've not seen it, I think, done very often. So I'm not sure I can speak to it. I think it could be a really cool idea depending on your audience. So I think one of the key things that is always going to be the first thing that you want to consider is who your audience is, and is that sort of fit with what they would be expecting. Um, yeah, I think I think there's no right or wrong, like to be honest, about like how to structure it. I think as long as it conveys the information that we've talked about, then it's probably a valid approach. And I would say give it a shot. I mean, it definitely helps with personalizing your letter. But I also do recommend try to get some if you decide to try it, get some feedback from a few other people and see what they think, and then tweak it from there. Okay, any other questions? Yes, for sure. So if you, despite all of your best intentions, you cannot find who is going to be looking at your cover letter, then absolutely addressing it to dear hiring manager or dear hiring committee or recruitment team would be absolutely fine. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ivan. I missed mentioning that. How long should a cover letter be, and is there a word limit? No, there is not a word limit, but the cover letter shouldn't be longer than a page. So, most commonly, I'd probably say about 4 paragraphs, not too long. So we know what happens if the paragraphs get too long. People don't want to read them. So we need to keep them sort of succinct and clearly communicative. So as long as it fits on a page. So on the page, you're going to have your header, ideally the same as your resume. So like the documents will match. So you're going to have your header. I'm not sure if I have an example in here. Let's see. Bear with me here. I do have an example of a template in the resume guidebook. So if I can ask you to pull that resume guidebook up, I'm going to do that in it right now, and I'll just indicate the page that it's on, and it articulates. One sec here. So I'm just going to pull up the resume guide and find you the page for the resume template. Oh, it's right on the last page. Okay, that's easy. It's page 15 of 15. So on that, you're going to see your contact information, and then you're going to also include sort of business style format in terms of who your letter is addressing as well. Okay. So I'm not sure if you were able to see when I went to the other screen, but can everyone see like my actual slides now again? Okay, just let me know. I'm just going to look at the question. So single spaced, yeah, single spaced for sure. And font, the font should match your resume. So ideally a sans serif font would be ideal. So sans serif would be, an example of sans serif would be what is on the slide right now. So you can tell that it's very easy to read. There's no little like curly cues with the letters. So if you look at, compare this font to say something like Times New Roman. Times New Roman has in each letter, there's little like extra squiggles kind of. If you analyze the two, you'll see the difference. I always recommend sans serif, both for accessibility and readability guidelines. It's actually easier on the eye. So I feel like we should make it as easy as possible on folks that read our materials. All right, so here's another question from Ivan. Would the order at the top of the page, would be the order at the top of the page when addressing the name, address? Sorry, Ivan, if you can clarify your question, that would be awesome. I'm just not exactly sure. Oh, what would be? Oh, what would be the order when addressing their name and address? Okay, gotcha. Okay, sorry. All right, so it would be the name of the, let's say you had the name of the hiring manager. So it'd be the name of the hiring manager, their title, the company. Depending on the size of the organization, you could put the department and then the company, then the address, which would include their street address and postal code. Okay, hopefully that helps. All right. Good question. So that's a good question, Nanish. And actually, that's one of the things that I think we need to do a little bit more research into. I believe that if your resume and cover letter are sent in the same document, that it would be all passed through ATS. It could be wrong, and it could be the case that some employers do that differently. So it'd be hard to know. But honestly, I don't necessarily recommend Canva at all, just because of the potential risks. There's just so many variables in terms of like how each company does recruitment. My feeling is I feel like it's just easier to kind of use formats that are always going to be fine. So I'm usually a big fan of Word. And actually, I'll pull up a resource. Actually, I'll send you in the email that I send you. I'll email you a video, which is super helpful. Our SSC folks did it in marketing in conjunction with a digital team at Mac, and it explains like how to create a resume using, and cover letter, of course, using Word that's very aesthetically pleasing. So you can actually get away from using any kind of template, because you can generally do what you need to in Word generally. Okay, so here's another question from Mikhail. Okay, so we've got, if we've completed multiple online non-credit courses on a website like Coursera that are directly related to the field we're applying for, especially if they're a bit more relevant than our degree, would the cover letter be a good place to mention that, or should that be on the resume instead? For example, okay, yeah, so I'll break that question up into two. So it could be on both. So on your resume, You could either, if you wanted to really highlight it and have it on your first page, maybe you have like your education section titled Education and Training, and that way you could have these additional courses that you took. Or you could put a separate section called Professional Development and highlight those courses that you took, potentially with a brief description of what you learned, or some highlights of projects that you did within those courses. That would also be really cool. And absolutely, you can have it in both places. So remember, the cover letter is an opportunity to kind of talk in depth that you didn't really have room for on your resume. So if you want to speak a little bit more in depth about the training that you have initiated and how that relates to the position and what you can contribute and use and really highlight those hard skills, and absolutely go for it. And the second part of your question, would it be more? Include that along with projects you've completed. Yeah, I think I've just, yeah, no worries for the long question. I think I just, I think I covered that. If not, just let me know. But I think I referred to, yes, include it as projects. Okay, awesome. All right, any other questions? Okay, you guys have offered some really excellent questions today, so thank you so much. That's super helpful for me, and I hope for you to get your questions answered individually. So feel free to yeah, let me know how I can help you. Okay, so just as a reminder, so for folks who have graduated from degree granting programs up to 10 years from graduation, you're more than welcome to book a meeting that's one-on-one. So if you're looking for some additional, like, kind of one-on-one specific questions or just some advice, myself and my colleagues are absolutely happy to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We do have one-on-one meetings, and we also do drop-ins basically every week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which are just 10 minutes. But if you just have a quick question, they're totally good. And we do have some monthly Ask Me Anything alumni sessions as well that you'll probably see some promotion going out for. So I hope that was helpful. You guys are so much welcome. I'm glad you found it helpful, and you guys are an awesome group. So thank you so much. You've made my afternoon just super fun. So hopefully that was good for you guys too. And I hope you guys have a very successful job search. And please feel free to connect whenever you need. Okay. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.